Today's guest is Kai Brach. Kai is the founder and publisher of Offscreen, a print-only curated magazine that examines and celebrates the hard work and creative thinking that happens behind the scenes of websites, games, and apps. He's here to show us that print is far from dead and tells us how we can start producing our ideas in physical form. So if you plan on publishing a magazine, a book, or the like, you don't want to miss this. Let's get to know more about Kai Brach. Kai, welcome to the show.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure having you on. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Kai, before we continue, I'm going to ask you, pencil or pixel?
Everyone, I think, would expect it to be pencil because I make a print magazine, but I have to say it's pixel because I spent 99% of my working day on my computer, and to actually get the magazine done is the job of my printer. Everything else is done on my screen, and so I'll definitely go for pixel.
Let me ask you this, since we're on sort of the this topic. Do you sketch anything out before you create a layout? Or do you just do everything online? You have your files open and kind of mix and match everything?
Yeah, definitely online. I mean, on the screen.
On the screen, sorry.
I do a lot of research with other magazines. So I go through a lot of other magazines and see what they do, and explore sort of their creative fields. But yeah, I realized that producing a magazine, much more so than doing websites, it's all about typography. At least the style that I'm pursuing, and to actually really get a feel for that, you really have to do some typesetting. Like, you actually have to put the type in there to actually see what it looks like and how it works. And a lot of times I then print it out on my cheap laser printer here just to get a feel for, how the text flows, the legibility of it, and whether the sizes and the margins and everything makes sense. But definitely, put it on, work online, or work on the screen, I guess, and then transfer that into a print document later on.
Awesome. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do, and tell us a little bit more about your background?
Okay, so I'm originally a web designer. I've been designing websites for about, a decade or so, mostly as a freelancer for clients in Germany, in Australia, and in the US. And in around 2011, I sort of started to look into the work that I was doing retrospectively. So I was trying to find out what happened to the websites and all the stuff that I've been producing online for the last 10 years. And I couldn't really find anything. There was pretty much everything that I've worked on in the past had disappeared almost. And that sort of made me think about, what's the word I'm looking for? The temporarity of the work that I'm doing. So it's actually online now today, and it disappeared tomorrow. And I really didn't like the fact that I was producing something that had no sort of legacy at all, and I couldn't actually eventually go to my kids and say, this is what I've been working on. And so after all this stuff happened, me looking into my work, I decided to take a break from work. I decided to tell my clients that I didn't really want to do that work anymore, and I took a break for 6 months. I started traveling around the world, and I made a conscious effort to actually meet some of the people of the websites and the apps that I've been using for a long time. And so I started this sort of humanization process of finding out more about the digital products and services that I've been using, and I found that really interesting. I found it really nice to meet them face to face and put a real face to bits and pixels. And basically, while I was traveling, I bought a lot of magazines. I actually walked into a lot of really nice bookshops and magazine shops, and I sort of became fascinated with printed magazines and printed books in general. I guess it was, I was hungry, I was thirsty for something different, something that wasn't just online. And after those 6 months, I came back and I looked at the magazines that I bought on during that trip, and thought about the stories and all the people that I met. And I really wanted to sort of combine those two things into something that was a bit more long lasting. And I guess that's how I came up with the idea of putting those stories, putting the faces of the people behind all these digital services into a more permanent format, into the magazine. And so after 10 years of doing web design stuff, I decided to change that around and go against the stream, basically go against what everyone else is doing, and move from pixels to print. And And yeah, that's 2.5 years ago. So now I'm to my third year of producing off screen pretty much full time. Up to issue number 9. I'm working on issue number 9 now. Issue number 8's come out in April this year.
Excellent.
Yeah, and that's pretty much me. And I'm based in Melbourne. I'm originally from Germany, so I've moved to Melbourne to Australia about 10 years ago. And I regularly go back to Germany to check in on my printer because the magazine is printed in Berlin.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, but also have friends and family still in Germany, so I keep going back and forth pretty much 3 times a year or so.
Very cool. It must take a great deal of confidence to go from web design to print.
I guess when you talk about confidence, I guess there's 2 sides to it. There's the confidence in yourself as a creative person to actually pull it off, and then there's the side of the financial or the monetary side, whether it's actually worth it, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the first, I guess the confidence I didn't really have in the beginning. It sort of grew over time, and looking at the first couple of issues that I produced, I'm not very proud of them at the moment. I mean today, because there's a lot of issues that a lot of problems that I've experienced over the first few things that I didn't really think about when I made the issue. So I guess my ability to make the issue, my confidence in actually being a publisher or being a print designer or being an editor, that sort of grew over time, and the confidence really came out of trial and error, really. Talking to other people, of course, getting feedback from the readers, that was really important in building up that sort of confidence. And even today, I still consider myself a very sort of amateur publisher. I really have a lot of respect for other publications out there, and I learn every single day, every single issue I put out, I learn new things. And so, that confidence is just something that every creative person sort of builds up over time. In terms of financial confidence, I guess I was working as a web designer for quite a while. I built up a bit of a buffer, a bit of a financial buffer, and I just basically told myself, okay, do this thing, try it for 6 months, like put some effort into it. Don't focus on anything else. Spend 6 months of your life on doing this thing. The worst that comes out of it is that you have a magazine that you can keep to yourself, even if no one else buys it. You have 3,000 copies of a magazine sitting in a shelf somewhere. But the best thing, the worst thing that could happen was I have a magazine I could show to my kids or to anyone who was interested. This is what I've done. I've tried it. It was a failure or was a success, whatever. To actually print a magazine, the money that you need is not humongous. I mean, compared to other startups, other businesses that need a lot of investment to get started, I think the printing itself cost me about $12,000 or $10,000, which is is a fair chunk of money, but it's not humongous if it fails.
And that's just to produce the magazine.
Yeah, that's not including my time and anything else that's required to actually get the magazine out. But as a freelancer, I never really looked at my time as something that I bill every hour. It's sometimes you work on something for 20 hours, and even if it's for a client, you spend 30 hours on researching, and it's not something that you bill. So I never really looked at it that way. I just wanted to produce something and make something that I could share with other people, and I could actually give to someone and say, this is what I've done.
Yeah. So aside from your initial investment, did you also have money so you could sort of live off of?
Yeah, I didn't really budget properly. I didn't really put all the numbers down in a spreadsheet or whatever. I just sort of said, look, this is how much money I need to make the magazine. If I realize that this is a task that I can't finish, for example, then I can always take on more client work. We're pretty lucky that in our industry there's a lot of work out there, and actually getting new jobs, some good, some bad. But getting new work is actually not that hard, and so I guess we're in a very privileged position to play around with ideas and do take these sabbaticals or these periods where we just say, okay, I'm going to focus on this now, and as long as I have no commitments like family or mortgage or anything like that, I think that's the best time we can do stuff like that, and why not?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't mean to put you on the spot with a whole money situation thing here, but it's good for people to hear that, right?
I'm completely open about it. I actually, if you go to the Offscreen blog, I actually shared pretty much my entire income last year. You can look up everything I do on Offscreen on the blog, on Offscreen blog, and any question you want to ask, feel free. I'm completely transparent.
Oh, awesome! And I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So this will be available at pencilversuspixel.com/Kai Brach, and that's Brach. Brach is his last name. Kai, I wanted to ask you how, if you could tell us a little bit about your process of building a magazine. Now, we'll probably not get into start to finish of this, but if you could at least give us an overview of, when you started, before you began Offscreen, what sort of steps did you take to learn how to create these things, and who did you talk to? Who do you reach out to for help?
I guess the first steps. So when I came home from my trip and I looked at the magazines that I bought during the trip, I was quite intimidated by the quality of work that they put out there, and I never thought, because at that point I've never had done any print stuff. So all the experience I had was in Photoshop and in HTML editors, writing code, pushing pixels, but nothing really that was delivered to a printer to actually then be produced. And so I looked through the magazines that I had on my shelf and basically contacted the editors and publishers and some of the designers there. A lot of them didn't reply, some of them did, and I asked them a few questions about how to make a magazine. And again, a lot of people told me that it's a lot of time, a lot of effort that goes into it. There's not a lot of money involved, so it was quite intimidating again. But I guess the first step for me was to find out how much money it would cost to actually make the magazine. So I've contacted printers, some of them in Melbourne, where I'm based. Quickly found out that was financially almost impossible, because the cost of living in Australia is incredibly high, and to produce a magazine here would, I think the final cover price that I calculated would have been, I don't know, $40 or something like that. So it was almost impossible. And so I contacted printers in Germany, because I thought, Berlin is actually really affordable as a city, and also the Germans know a thing or two about the printing press. And so I contacted the printers there, and I was surprised that they actually, the quotes were really, really affordable. So that was the first step, to actually see whether, producing anything that, whether the final product has a price tag that it's actually, is affordable, or is something that where people go, holy crap, that's, I'm not going to buy a magazine for $50. So that was the first step. And then once I actually had some quotes and I figured out how much shipping would be, I then contacted people that I met during my trip, or people that I knew through Twitter and Facebook, and asked them whether they would be interested in contributing to a magazine that was all about people behind web services, websites, apps, and that sort of stuff. And some of them, I got some raised eyebrows about, why print? Why is that a bit paradoxical? Why you would put something that, people that are sort of responsible for the demise of print into a print magazine? But I think after explaining a bit more what I wanted to do, they were convinced, and I sort of started adding people to my list. And then I tried to, so as a publisher, you actually work around a central document that is called a content plan. And in my case, it was basically just a spreadsheet that where you line out pretty much every single page of the magazine. So I worked on that content plan for quite a while to figure out how many pages the magazine would have, how I would structure the magazine, whether I needed ads or some sort of other financial support, and how I included that into the magazine. And based on that content plan, I would then contact my contributors and ask them whether they could deliver this piece by that and that time. Obviously, the interviews were the longest and the most important bits. So they became sort of the central element of the magazine, and continues, the common thread throughout all the issues that followed. And then I basically taught myself how to design a magazine in InDesign, and I went to a website called lynda.com, which is a video tutorial website, and I've spent you paid $30 or $25 for a month access. It's similar to Treehouse, but it's a bit more focused on just basically learning software instead of code or anything.
Right.
So I spent 2-3 weeks watching all the videos they had on InDesign, on typography, on Illustrator, publishing, and prepress, color management, etc. and really try to wrap my head around how to actually put something like that together, because it's quite a sizable document, right? You have like 150 pages, and actually to be able to manage that and to be able to, manage type and manage photo assets and all that seems quite overwhelming at first. So I did that. So that all these things happened not chronologically, but they happened sort of at the same time. I was doing a bit of that, bit of this, and then I started basically with my interview, started getting people to actually contribute and send in photos, send in material. And over, I guess the first issue took me about 4 to 5 months to figure out to set up a structure, to then put it together, and then I had some proof prints done. So before you print something, you do some proofing, which is gives you an example, gives you an idea of what it will look like in the final print. And I had that done in Melbourne, so I was working with a printer in Melbourne here to get some of the pages printed to see what they look like. And then there's more changes, and getting to that final file before you send it off to the printer, it's always a huge it's an overwhelming sort of challenge, because you work, if you work on the web, if you work in digital, you can always go in there and bug fix and change and edit things. But with print, you have to reach that final file, have to get to that final version, and it's almost it drives you crazy, like it drives you nuts, because every time you export the final file, you find another typo, you find another issue with color, you find all these different problems, and so you go back in there, change it, edit it again, etc., etc. But eventually, you get to that final file, you send it to the printer, and that was it. And because the printer was in Berlin, I was basically camping in front of my mailbox for 2 weeks or so, or 3 weeks, until the magazine finally arrived at my doorstep.
Wow.
And it was a pretty amazing moment to actually receive 6 months or 5 months of your work printed and bound in the mail, and you open it, and it's pretty cool.
And it's a really beautiful magazine. And it's on uncoated paper. I have a copy right here. And I really love what you've done here with as far as sponsors. You touched on the sponsorship, and I love what you've done with the sponsor. The little sponsors section is just so clean and right in the middle. I love it. That's great.
Thanks, man. It's really interesting that they mentioned the sponsorship thing, because I thought about advertising, and the cover price alone would be really hard to sustain a magazine with just the cover price. That's why a lot of magazines have advertising in it. But I didn't really like advertising as such, because it sort of disrupts the flow of reading, and it also sometimes just looks pretty ugly, right?
Yeah.
And so I came up with that sponsorship concept, where I give a sponsor a very consistent sort of unified look in the center of the magazine, and there's only 8 sponsors, and they all look the same. And to my surprise, it wasn't really hard to get sponsors on board, because these companies are they're tech companies. They're quite open to some innovative ideas, and they pretty much had no experience in print either, so they just wanted to explore see whether it actually helps them. And when I actually sent out the first couple of issues, I actually got a lot of feedback from my readers, to my surprise, and they all told me that for the first time ever, they actually read pretty much every single word in the magazine, including the ones in the ads.
Yep.
And that to me was surprising, because it proved that if you do something a bit less in your face, a bit more subtle and a bit more thoughtful, it actually has more of an advertising, more of an attention grabbing effect. Than
absolutely.
Going in there, putting a massive ad with whatever slogan, catchy slogan in there. It actually helped. The subtlety of the ads helped a lot to convince the people that they should actually look at them. That's pretty interesting.
You're a publisher. You publish these magazines. Would you say that it's still pretty much open for anyone to start a magazine? You've already mentioned that you see magazines pop up every week. You go to your local bookshop, bookstore, and you see all kinds of magazines popping up. Some of them don't last. Some of them may last a bit. Is it something you recommend for other people to try out to start?
Yeah, sure. I think obviously the entry barriers are a little bit higher than online, than launching a blog, for example. I think the first thing you should ask yourself if you produce a magazine, and that comes from someone that is, as I said, I still consider myself quite a bit of a newbie. So I'm a one-man show, so I don't have experience in terms of working with larger teams, and how much effort and how different that sort of approach is if you work in a bigger team. But coming from me, I would say that the first question you should ask yourself is what is the unique edge to your magazine? It's pretty much the same question you should ask yourself about anything you do. You need to have a unique edge, but in print, if you want to survive, if you want to produce a sustainable magazine, you will only do that. You will only be able to do that if you actually can stand out on your newsstand. And even though the newsstand is not necessarily as important as it used to be, because I sell most of the magazines online through my website, but you need to have a slogan that nicely captures what your magazine is about. And in Offscreen's case, it's the people behind Bits and Pixels. So basically, the unique angle there is to actually show the lives of the people that produce digital things. And there's so many magazines coming out these days about food and traveling and all these sort of what we call the hipster topics. Spending a lot of money on nice food, being organic about it, doing all this, and there's so many magazines out there now, and that it would be really hard to just produce another one or another design magazine or another magazine about inspiration or creativity. It's you need to have a unique angle. And if you look at the newsstand, if you look at the magazines that succeed, and I'm not talking about huge financial success. A lot of times for publications to be successful means they are sustainable. They generate enough money to either pay someone as a part-time or full-time job, and have a readership that comes back and actually makes the thing sustainable. If you look at the ones that succeed and they produce more than a couple of issues, they're usually ones that have a very unique community behind them. So there's a magazine completely focused on fixies or on sneakers. There's a magazine, Hot Rum Cow, completely focused on booze and drinks and beer and alcohol. And so you need this very unique angle so that you can build a community or a passionate readership around that topic. If it's really broad, it's sometimes extremely hard to actually as with everything else in business, to actually have that stand out from all the other competitors. And the same goes for magazines. So I guess yes, the answer is yes. I think I would recommend it, but think long and hard about what sort of topic you want to focus on, because there's a lot of content out there already, and that's also competing a lot of times with the content that's online as well. So
you basically you bootstrapped this project on your own. You didn't go through a Kickstarter. You didn't go through anything like that, and that's very admirable, because you do see a lot of different projects that are getting started through something like Kickstarter, a crowd-funded project.
I actually have to say I actually tried Kickstarter. There was a bit of a different concept, but Offscreen as a magazine, I tried. I put on Kickstarter. I didn't succeed. I was actually short, I think, a few $1,000s.
Wow.
And that was like almost 3 years ago. So it was a different environment. I think I was asking for $16,000 or $18,000. Nowadays, people ask for 50 or 100,000 or so. Yeah. That's almost seems to be the minimum now. But yeah, I think. And again, I think Kickstarter is great. I think it has worked really well for a lot of people. I found it difficult for certain reasons. For one reason being that I think producing a magazine about people on the web is something that is hard to explain, and I think a lot of people still find it difficult to understand until they see the printed copy of the magazine, and then they sort of clicks and they go, oh yeah, this is actually really nice. But it's hard to convince someone to pay 20 or 30 or whatever dollars on a magazine if they can get similar content online. And I'm not making a secret out of it. Like the content that's in the magazine, to a certain extent, you can find online as well. Not the same content, but similar interviews, similar sort of background information. You can find that online, but actually repackaging it into a print product that people can appreciate and collect and put in their shelves is that sort of adds the value to it. It's not so much the content itself. There's a little story that I keep telling to people that whenever that sort of conversation about real products and physical objects comes up. So one of the people that I interviewed in the magazine, his name is on the cover. And when the magazine was done, he bought a few more copies to give to his family and friends. And when he gave a copy to his mum, it made her cry. And
wow.
That's a guy who's pretty successful. Has a company. He's obviously has a lot of money, even obvious to his mum, who's not very internet savvy. So the success is pretty obvious, but for his mum, that success sort of became more real when she saw the name of her son printed on the cover of a magazine, you know.
Wow.
And I think that's sort of the emotional power that comes from physical products that we don't get from digital, because you can show her, his mum, you know, any website you want, and she will go, oh yeah, okay. But if you show her a print magazine, you know, that's something that has a certain power, a certain sort of influence on your emotions that you just don't get from digital content. And I think that's a really good example for why people still want to spend, you know, $20 on a magazine, because it's an object. It's something that it exists in the world, you know, something that you can share with other people in reality. And yeah, it's very powerful.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, I love those kind of stories. See, that's what makes print so much more worth it. Obviously.
Yeah.
You know, there's a quote that I read, and so I don't remember where it came from, but someone said, like, I don't remember it word for word, but it was something like, "I'm not going to take my web designs to my grave," you know.
Yeah, yeah, and all of what I said, you know, should be taken with a grain of salt. I mean, I'm a web designer. I love the web, and I love being part of that community. I really feel strongly about being part of a web community, and not being necessarily part of the whole print and graphic design community. I still identify myself as a web designer, you know. And I think there's a lot of things that come out of the web and the digital products we make that have a huge impact as well. You know, real impact. Not just physical products can have that impact. There's a lot of real impact that comes from digital products as well. It's just that appreciation for an object, and it sounds really superficial or really you know, a bit. Yeah, I don't know, a bit superficial to talk about an object being, you know, having a certain emotional value, but I don't know. There's, you know, if you look at the things we put on our shelves, like the bookshelf in in the back of your screen there, you know, it's little trophies that we put on there because we conquered them, and we want other people to know that this is who we are. This is the interests that I have. These are the things that I like, or that I care about in my life. You know. And it's the same for magazines and for anything else you do, like the guitar, the clothes you wear, you know, the car you drive. It sounds really horrible, but the brands and the things we put in our lives, you know, are the things that we identify with. And if you sit in a cafe reading something on your iPad, no one really knows what you do, right? But if you sit in a cafe reading a copy of Monocle magazine or Offscreen magazine, you're basically telling the world, okay, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is what I want to be. This is the sort of people that I want to associate with, right? And yeah, it's weird. I'm very conflicted with like having objects and material that you know, using those things to express yourself, because I actually have I'm in this really small apartment. I love having as little things as I can possibly have, but I do appreciate certain things in my life that are of quality and that I really sort of identify with. And I think a really good read, whether it's a book or a magazine, is something that's part of that small sort of amount of things that I like. Yeah, it's weird. I know that material things can't replace other things, but at the same time, there's few things more exciting than getting something in a mail and opening it and smelling it and reading through it and experiencing you know, that something with all your senses. It's
you know, it's a good thing you brought that up, because I really think that you nailed the way you package these things. I mean, it's like it's tightly packaged. It's in a nice little. It's not even an envelope. It's like a cardboard. You know, not box. What is it? Is it an envelope?
It is an envelope. I guess you can call it a mailer. Some people call it a mailer. Yeah.
That's a beautiful touch. You know, that's just the small little details are what matter. I mean,
it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I always think that could be improved even more, because it's a pretty generic sort of mailer or envelope. You know, you can actually print your own off-screen thingies, and you know, have customized to the size. But then, and that's actually a really good thing to talk about, is like constraints. You know, how far do you want to go, and how important is it to have even a more customized or more you know, a detail-rich sort of experience in that. And I had a conversation or I answered some questions about that in a recent interview. I find it really interesting how people always, you know, the details are in the details. It's something that a lot of people say, right? Yeah. So the details, the design is, what's the saying? Design is in the details.
Or delight? Is it delight in the details?
Right, that's the one. That was the one. And it's true. You know, I do agree that delight is in the details, but at the same time, everyone that works does creative output has certain constraints, and I'm not only talking about client constraints or some constraints coming in through a brief. I'm talking about in my case very obvious practical constraints. For example, that I can't spend $5 on a shipping envelope to produce a shipping envelope that really looks great. I want this to be practical.
Absolutely.
I want it to be easy to open and be provide protection for the magazine, but at the same time, I also want it to be environmentally friendly. Right? I don't want to spend $5 to produce a plastic wrapper that has a lot of chemicals in it. And so there's all these different constraints that you work with, and I think making the best use of what you have is sometimes. I find it, because we talk about constraints so much about creative constraints, but there's a whole world of practical constraints that don't necessarily breed creativity. They just sort of breed acceptance of what you can do. So for example, with the mailer, I've been, it's a small thing, but I've been going through various different options there with my shipper, and this is the thing that I decided on because it's stable, like it's quite solid, and it's also environmentally friendly. There was a lot of other bubble wrap options. I didn't want that because it's, and so
really not
anyway.
necessary either.
Yeah, I mean, long story short is basically there are probably even better options better solutions to that problem, and I could go crazy in terms of design, having my own envelopes printed, but this is so far still the most affordable, the most practical, and also environmentally friendly option. And environmentally friendliness is something that I'm very concerned about.
No, that's definitely great. And it's great to think about that all the time, especially nowadays when things are, some folks or companies tend to go the inexpensive route, to save a couple of bucks using, like you said, plastic, bubble wrap, these kind of things. But then, they don't think about the implications. They don't think about the process and what happens at the end. That it gets tossed in a landfill or in the ocean, and that's that.
Yeah.
So it's really good that you're being conscious about that. We were talking about constraints right now, and I wanted to ask you, since you're pretty much a one-man show, doing everything yourself. Well, actually, let me ask you this: do you do everything yourself, or do you get any help on the side for specific pieces of producing a magazine?
I do. I mean, obviously, taking the photos and all that, I need photographers. I do, however, conduct all the interviews. I have.
How do you conduct the interviews?
Oh, sorry. People always think that I'm traveling around and I've got this amazing life where I just visit all these amazing cities. But no, it's all done.
You do quite a bit of traveling still.
I do traveling, but it's not. Yeah, I'm not visiting all the people that are actually in the magazine. So it's mostly 99% is done through Google Documents, so email and online documents where I conduct the interviews in, and it happens sort of in sessions. So I create a document, give them a basic brief, and then we start the interview with a couple of questions. Then they answer those questions, and I do some more questions, and so it sort of evolves organically into conversation style interview. But other than that, I mean, the only person that I hire to help me out is a proofreader, because my native first language isn't English, so I still want someone to actually go over this and make sure that it actually makes sense. So that's the only person that really I hire on a regular basis to help me out. And once she's done, I jump back into InDesign, and then at some point the printer takes over, obviously. And while the printer is producing the magazine, I put my web designer hat back on and do the web design for the new issue. And it's something that I like. All these different roles is great. It's stressful at times, but I think it helps me stay motivated, because I know that after 4 weeks or so of being stuck in Google Documents and reading a million words, I can go back into that creative mode and do a bit of design work or do a bit of web development work. It's nice to have that sort of constant change.
Awesome. Do you have to provide any sort of release forms or those kind of things?
If I asked a lawyer, he probably would say yes, you should definitely do that. I haven't done so in the past. I think it's a bit of a naive sort of attitude, and I hope that it won't. I won't regret that at some point. But no, so far it's been great. And most of the time with the photographers or with photography in general, I actually had a lot of people supply photography through their own network of friends and family and colleagues. So a lot of times the photos in the magazine are taken by sometimes the guy's husband, the woman's husband, or the guy's wife. Sometimes it's a designer working in their team, or sometimes it's their cousin. So it's another thing when we're talking about constraints, because had I more money, if I had more money, I would actually produce, I think, even better magazine. I would actually have a lot nicer photos sometimes. I would have people doing all the retouching of the photos, which I'm not very good at. But given that I have so many constraints and such a small budget, I really rely on people to actually help me out, to have that sort of attitude of, don't worry about it, I'll find someone for us to actually get this done. And in publishing, where you don't make a killing, this is something that you really rely on. And a lot of people, there's a lot of talk online, and there's sort of the general attitude at the moment that don't do anything for free, and never underestimate your own value and all that. And I generally agree with that, but there's also certain things in life that I think we should, the sort of the financial aspect, or the monetary aspect comes second. There's certain things that I would see as opportunities to be involved in a great project. And I think a lot of people consider Offscreen to be such a project. They want to be part of it. They see it as almost as an honor to be included in something that they can give to their parents or put on their shelves or whatever. And in that sense, you really need some people that are willing to put in effort without having that sort of financial reward. Going the extra mile to find someone that helps us both out in getting photos done and that sort of stuff. So you really rely on people that are willing to, basically do you an effort, do you a favor, and making a bit of extra effort to get it done. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You've given a ton of really great advice and insight into what you do. If there's one piece of advice that you would give to an aspiring, someone that would like to start a magazine or maybe publish a book, something in that field, what would that piece of advice be?
Those questions are always tricky, because I always feel like I have to be really smart about my answer. I would say that I think it's a bit of what I said before. Just make sure that you have a really sort of solid concept, something that's really unique. And I guess that one sort of bigger piece of advice that I have is that I was so intimidated by the whole thing. Like, I was really scared of producing something that I didn't like, that I sort of feel ashamed of at the end, that I didn't producing something that cost $10,000 to produce and then not being able to give it to someone because I didn't like how it turned out. So there was a lot of sort of fear of producing something that is not worth charging people money for. And I guess my advice would be that that's okay. You just start somewhere, and if it's not perfect, I mean, it's never going to be perfect. But if it's not what you hoped it would be, then just keep iterating. That idea of iteration is not something that's only works in the web. It also works in other areas, and including in print. The first issue is everything but perfect. Every other issue, every issue you produce after that will be a little bit better, and you're always sort of striving towards that perfect issue. So if you ask editors or publishers what's their favorite issue of their own magazine, they will most of the time will tell you it's the latest one, because that's the one where I made least of the mistakes. And so I guess that advice would be, don't worry too much about perfection. Just get it out there and keep iterating on it. And as you iterate on it, your confidence will grow accordingly.
Excellent. You're like I said, you're in publishing, and so this question seems appropriate. Are there any books that you recommend for anyone to read? Maybe something that you're currently reading, something you're really into.
Well, so you mean also related to publishing, or
it could be anything that you're into. It could be something that motivates you, or something that you learned, sort of the nuts and bolts about publishing. It could be anything, really.
Again, I don't think there's one thing that I would recommend. I'm also really at the moment I'm again in the stage where I proofread a lot of stuff. So an issue has like 30, 35, 40,000 words, and after proofreading it like 3 or 4 times, I just don't want to read anything anymore. And so I go through phases, and I'm not a huge book nerd, to be honest. I rarely read fiction. Most of the stuff that I read is nonfiction, and then even then I focus on smaller chunks. So I have a lot of articles on my reading list that I read. I try to, in my reading, I try to, I think when I first started in web design and being part of the web community, I was soaking up everything about design, about entrepreneurship, about development, the latest and greatest frameworks, whatever. And I noticed that the last few years I've been completely moving away from that. I'm actually now reading a lot more about other topics that are completely unrelated, some political, some more science-based, a bit more about I guess interesting stories that happen in real life that we often forget. So a good example would be, which is not a book, but it's a podcast, American Life. That's a good example of real life stories that are nice to sort of keep in the back of your head while you're doing all this digital stuff that's really ephemeral and really it's something that doesn't really exist in the world. I like to balance it out with real life stories, I think.
Absolutely, this is great. So Kai, where can people reach out to you? Where can we find you online?
I think the best way is just go to offscreenmag.com. So offscreenmag.com, one word, or just search for Offscreen Magazine online, because I'm the only person behind everything. If you contact me by email, Facebook, Twitter, the blog, Instagram, anything, it will always be me responding. So any which way works for you, I'll be the one getting back to you.
Nice. You're all over the map.
I'm all over the internet.
Kai, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It was an honor.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for being here, too. And we'll see you next week.